You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 28th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. Coming up on today's programme, Thailand declares a state of emergency after an earthquake in Myanmar. We'll be live in Bangkok. Our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, will be here to talk about foreign media ownership. And then Deputy Head of Radio, Tom Webb, joins me to discuss the news out of Asia. What do you have for us, Tom?
Nothing but good news in the East Asian papers, not least for aspiring female pilots.
They have to be at least 5'2", I believe.
They do, yes, if they can reach the controllers.
Tom, thank you. We'll be back with you in a moment. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Georgina Godwin. We begin today's programme in Bangkok, which has declared a state of emergency following a strong earthquake in neighbouring Myanmar. Monocle's Asia editor, James Chambers, is on the ground there. James, we spoke to you earlier just as the earthquake happened. Can you recap where you were and what was going on?
Yes, Georgina, we spoke about, I guess, less than an hour after it struck. It was about 1:20 p.m. here in Bangkok, just lunchtime. It was a 7.7 magnitude quake. It was in Myanmar on the border with Thailand near the city of Mandalay. And I just finished lunch. I was going to the BTS station, which is like the subway, but it's a sky train here, so it's elevated. And the platforms are pretty much open air. So I was standing on the top floor heading to my next meeting, and then suddenly the platform starts to shake. And I guess my first reaction was, there must be a lot of trains coming through, and then it keeps shaking. And then my mind goes elsewhere. I'm thinking, oh gosh, is this some kind of bomb? And then I guess it keeps going, and you realize, oh no, this must be an earthquake. But earthquakes are quite rare in Thailand, so it's not the first thing you imagine. But then the guards started blowing their whistles, and you get told to evacuate, and then everyone's just streaming onto the streets. This was downtown Bangkok in Siam. Loads of shopping malls like Siam Paragon, loads of offices. Everyone was pouring out onto the streets. Loads of tourists. And so suddenly the pavements are just jam-packed with people in the middle of the day trying to figure out what was going on.
And I mean, we've seen horrific footage here of a rooftop swimming pool overflowing, of buildings collapsing. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so I guess the big news here is there was a 30-story building under construction, quite close to actually where I am now in my apartment. I think if we'd been looking out the window, we might have seen it come down. And it was actually a government building for the Office of the Auditor General. So I guess there'll be an investigation to what happened there. But the building completely collapsed. There's been at least 3 fatalities, and there are reported to be dozens of workers, construction workers, still trapped on the site. So that has been the biggest damage here in Bangkok. As you mentioned, there's been some crazy photos of swimming pools on rooftops of these really tall hotels, and big towers, pouring and cascading down the building. In our own apartment here, the swimming pool completely emptied out onto the kind of fire escape steps, and my poor wife was evacuating our kids and slipped on the stairs, and so there's it's been a lot of incidents like that. But I think Bangkok has been very much spared the worst. City Hall has been running the show here. The governor declared an emergency or disaster zone, but he did a press conference recently and said actually it's not as bad as first feared. I think the real story is going to be coming out of Myanmar, because I mean that country is further behind in the development scale. It's in the middle of a civil war, and the buildings around Mandalay have been absolutely flattened, and we're hearing reports of hundreds of potential deaths. So I think I guess the big story is going to be coming out of there.
And has anywhere else in the region been affected?
Yeah, well, I mean, neighbours will have been affected. So, we'll have reports coming out of India as well. So it's a regional story, but I guess it's just Bangkok is a major international city. It's not used to having earthquakes, so it's obviously been a very, very, very big story here. And the last, few hours have just been people, waiting for those big aftershocks. And there's been some kind of daft messages going around where reportedly from the government saying, there's one coming at 4:30 or one coming at 2:30, as if you can kind of predict these kinds of things. So people have just been waiting on the streets, Offices were emptied out, they were closed, shopping malls were closed, and so just everyone was just sitting outside. Fortunately, it's been a nice sunny day, not too hot. I mean, Bangkok is approaching summer, but the big challenge for people here is just getting home because all the public transport has been stopped. I myself was fortunate enough that I was able to walk home in about 2 hours, but there are people whose kids have finished school across town and still can't find their way home. So I think the big challenge for people in Bangkok will actually be getting home, and especially for people who live outside of the city, because traffic is always bad here. This is the last Friday of the month when people get paid. That's notoriously bad for traffic, and then you layer this on top. It's a bit crazy out there.
So James, you say a state of emergency has been called and City Hall is running things. What does that mean in practice?
Yeah, so in Myanmar, the central government, the junta, have declared a state of emergency in several provinces. But actually here it's a bit less clear because the international news have all been reporting that the Prime Minister has declared a state of emergency. But as far as the Thai media and as far as I can see, it's actually City Hall that's declared Bangkok to be what they call a disaster zone or emergency zone. So it's not, I'm seeking confirmation about what actually is the situation here, but it seems to be like City Hall is running the show. Governor Chad Sitiput is a guy we featured in Monocle before. He's a very sensible guy, very much like Governor, and he seems to be very much in charge. I think the panic, the worst of it is over, but you do see some traumatic sights. When I was walking back from where I was to home, along a main street, one of the hospitals was being evacuated by the army, essentially. So you saw all of these poor, very elderly people in their beds being pushed down a main road. They managed to clear one of the lanes, and they were basically being pushed along this main road to go to, I guess, another building, maybe a safer building. So I imagine, I don't know if they're in the middle of care or what was interrupted, but that won't be good for them. It'd be very traumatic. So there's still been a big impact here in Bangkok, even if we haven't had the worst like Myanmar.
Thank you very much, James. Now, of course, we'll be keeping up to date with you as the situation moves on. That was James Chambers, who's Monocle's Asia editor. Now, here's Laura Kramer with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Georgina. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance visits Greenland today, sparking anger in the Arctic island and Denmark. The American delegation has cut back its trip and will only visit the U.S. military base at Bidufik. The visit follows Donald Trump's past claims that the U.S. should take over the territory. Australia will hold a national election on May 3rd. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced the vote today, kicking off a 5-week campaign focused on the rising cost of living. Polls show his Labour Party is in a tight race with the opposition. And the fashion giant H&M will use AI to create digital versions of its models. The company says these digital twins will appear in some ads and some social media posts, but only with the model's permission. Critics worry about the impact on the fashion industry. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Georgina.
Thank you, Laura. As Trump's tariffs continue to reshape global trade, China is one of the countries most significantly impacted. Chinese manufacturers are scrambling to find alternatives to what many call the irreplaceable American market. Well, I'm joined now by Yoko Kubota, who is the Wall Street Journal's Deputy Bureau Chief in Beijing. Yoko, thanks for coming on the show. How has Trump's tariff policy towards China affected the country's export industry so far?
Yes, so it's still relatively early in its days in terms of the tariffs. First, we had 10% to China, and then we had an additional 10%. So now it's at 20%. But we're still waiting to see the real impact. I mean, if you look at some of the data that's been released, you can already kind of sense that there is impact, and that for January and February export data, those were announced combined for 2 months. There was a slowdown already in growth. And that was because people had been expecting tariffs to hit. So some of the exporting were front loaded already. So you can start to sense that, things are not as it was before, but the real impact is still yet to be seen.
Now, you recently attended a major exporters exhibition in Shenzhen. Hundreds of Chinese factory owners gathered to discuss survival strategies in this new economic landscape. Tell us more about that meeting.
Yeah, it was a fascinating event. It happens twice a year. So it's relatively new, but a regular event. But it's aimed to bring together Chinese manufacturers, so small factories that make stuff, everything from kitchen goods to binoculars to, clothes to toys, you name it. Those factories are attending, as well as merchants, so people who sell on e-commerce platforms like Amazon, as well as those e-commerce platforms. So they're all in one site, and they're able to look at what goods Chinese factories are producing, what could be sold on e-commerce platforms, and how they could sell better. And it was interesting because as I walked around and talked to people, I got this sense that, America has been a huge market for these manufacturers. And now there is a sense that you can't put all your eggs in one basket anymore. That US market, there's just so much uncertainty and all the tariffs coming. So they're trying to figure out what to do. But there's a big question of what are we going to do? Because America's been so important, it's very hard to just replace it, overnight. So it was very interesting to hear all the thinking and the struggles, and also the ingenuity that these manufacturers and the buyers they have.
Such as, what are the strategies they're coming up with?
Sure. So I guess one is that they would diversify the site of production. So we've already been seeing this over the years, but they are even more aggressively considering possibly making their goods elsewhere, like Southeast Asia. Cambodia came up, Vietnam came up, and that's because they expect that perhaps by going to these sites and their goods not being made in China, but made in Cambodia or made in Vietnam, that they could somehow, but they could decrease the impact of the U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods. But even that's a little bit unclear. I mean, these markets are already becoming quite crowded with Chinese manufacturers. Costs are growing. And on top of that, the Trump administration could slap tariffs on these markets as well. But anyway, the diversification from production was one thinking. Another is, you diversify where you sell into. So you might have been reliant on the U.S. Maybe we can sell more in places like Russia or places like, again, Southeast Asia or Latin America. It was very interesting. Oh, go ahead.
You say that this is very early days for the tariff. I wonder if you think it's going to continue or intensify, and what further impacts might we see?
That's a great question. And I think everyone's asking the same question. To date, the focus of tariffs, we were expecting the Trump administration to potentially focus on China quite a bit from right at the start, but actually they've been focused on other regions as well, including Canada and Mexico. So there's a lot of uncertainties, and we're waiting to see what more could happen. The next step could be the reciprocal tariffs that President Trump has mentioned. That date is April 2nd, and it's quite likely that, China could be a part of that announcement, given that he may be targeting countries with a lot of, big trade imbalances with the U.S. Although there's also likelihood that some nations could be exempt. But at any rate, President Trump earlier in the days during his campaign has indicated that China could face tariffs of up to 60% or so. We're still at 20%. So it is possible that we would see an intensified approach by the U.S. after this.
You've talked about strategies that companies themselves might adopt. What about the Chinese government?
That's a great question, too. So far, when the tariffs have been announced, they have hit back with retaliatory tariffs. But in reality, they're limited in what they can do because, the problem at heart is that China has a big surplus, trade surplus, when it comes to trading with the U.S. And that means, they don't have so much that they can hit on in terms of American goods that they're importing because they're exporting a lot more. So there's limitations in what they could do there. They're also potentially hoping that there would be some kind of a quote unquote trade deal. President Trump, maybe he likes to strike deals. When I speak with Chinese businessmen, some people have quite high hopes for something to be resolved through deals. So maybe there is something possible around there. But again, it's a little bit unclear what a deal could be when two countries are competing at a very fundamental level for technology and geopolitical domination, et cetera. So the other is the diversification of production sites that we have discussed that China, as a government would probably not really want to see. That means their own, factories going out of the country. So it might be a possibility for companies, but it may not be an ideal strategy when you look at it from the government's eyes.
Yoko Kabuta of the Wall Street Journal in Beijing, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. The British government has been repeatedly challenged in the House of Lords over its failure to come forward with new rules on foreign investment in UK news media companies. A consultation on the issue concluded last summer, and there are claims that ministers have held off making a decision to avoid antagonising Gulf nations. The previous Conservative government blocked the investment arm of the Abu Dhabi government, that's International Media Investments, from taking a stake in the broadsheet, The Telegraph. Well, with me now is Andrew Tuck, our Editor-in-Chief. Andrew, how important is it who owns the media in the UK?
Well, I think we could have a bit of discussion about this, couldn't we? Because it's not just here in the UK. So it's actually quite a fascinating topic. This looks like a local story until you start thinking about it and unpacking it. So as you say, what happened was that the Abu Dhabi investors tried to buy the Telegraph. They stumped up £600 million for it. And then there was a hullabaloo because, is Abu Dhabi as proud of press freedom as the UK is? Maybe not. So there was a challenge there. The Telegraph has good connections, and under the last government managed to persuade lots of people that this was it was going to pull down everything that Britain stood for and something had to be done. So, and you can understand some of the concerns around it. So lo and behold, in May 2024, they brought forward some rules that stopped foreign investors, state owners, coming into the country and taking control of newspaper groups here. So all well and good. You can understand it, but it's a complicated world. That actually newspapers, of course, are vital. We love newspapers. We love print, but actually for young people, they're getting all their news from TikTok. Does it matter that that's actually Chinese owned? When we think about people getting their news from the likes of Facebook, does that matter? It's owned by Meta. Now Meta for many people is a nice, wise, kind company. For other people, they're very unsure about some of the things that Meta does because it goes along with governments in rather controlling places about stopping press freedom. It's worked very sympathetically with the Chinese to make sure it has access to China. So should Meta be banned as well? So the minute you start thinking about it, you can see why the government gets in a bit of a tizzy because they don't want to offend Abu Dhabi and Gulf states, but it is a mess. It's a complicated thing to think through.
And I wonder how far diversity of ownership affects press freedom.
Well, I think it's good to have a diversity of ownership. But again, many of the criticisms that are being dragged to the forefront here are things that we would have harumphed about elsewhere. So, for example, when in Russia, for example, they're like, you cannot have any ownership here by foreign NGOs or by foreign media groups of our institutions. We saw that as an assault on democracy, on the ability for outsiders to come and invest in a multiplicity of media outlets. But when it comes to our direction, and we're unsure about these people, and they're state players, then it's this is a terrible thing. I think it may be good to make sure you know who owns your media. but we have lots of TV stations operating here, many from the Gulf, and they don't seem to upset the apple cart too much. And the Telegraph story is chaotic because it's 2 years now. They still haven't managed to offload that 600 million investment. Apparently, they'll be lucky if they get close to 500 million. So it's left uncertainty in the sector as well.
And of course, British-owned media companies, and indeed media companies throughout the world, are running out of cash, many of them. And I wonder if the ban on foreign investment really bodes ill for the economic model.
So this, again, is why the government is saying, actually, be careful what you do here, because we have to bring in these rules in a nuanced way, because actually media companies, when they go to raise funds for anything, if you go to a venture capitalist, if you go to a private family who wants to invest, maybe they don't sit in the UK. So is that okay for you to take their money, but they're not actually controlling anything to do with the editorial board, for example? They want to make sure that these rules are nuanced. Even back in May 2024, when they brought in these rules, there were some caveats. And so you could have a small ownership from a foreign company. I think what people want to avoid is, and this is the crux of it, how do you stop a foreign government who's not that keen on being criticised purchasing a media company, especially a newspaper company or a TV company, and then curtailing what it covers on its news? Now, is that actually just self-censorship or actual censorship? That's a bit that needs to be controlled. But again, you go to the States, you see what Jeff Bezos bought a newspaper, and then when it came to the elections, he was like, okay, I don't want you covering these things. Now Mr. Trump is in power, I want you to carry these storylines, and lo and behold, it's happening. So just because, say, Mr. Bezos came to town and perhaps bought the Telegraph, it doesn't mean that things are simpler. It's a complicated world for all of these media companies to operate in. I think many of us here in the UK, we imagine it's like Evelyn Waugh in the 30s, and there's some nice lord who owns the newspaper, and it's all like Scoop. But it ain't. The world, unfortunately, for good or bad, has changed. But these are the conversations that need to be happening in Paris, in Washington, in everywhere. What do you want from your media?
And what do you need from your government? I mean, without foreign investment, can the independent media anywhere survive without government help? And are they likely to get it? Not in the US at the moment, it looks.
Well, not in the US, but you see some support coming forth in places like France, which believes in the media and has also done the good things in the past to make subscriptions to newspapers affordable for younger people. And you do see some interesting institutions coming forward in Germany, in the UK even, to support local media. And in fact, there was a good event at Buckingham Palace just the other day where they invited in many of the local newspaper reporters, because I think there is an understanding here from government and from all parties that if you want to keep a robust democracy at a local level in your city, in your borough, even in your shire, you do need a questioning media, and it's good. It's good for democracy. It's good for keeping people on their toes. So those things are important. But even then, these groups, these what we thought of as the local newspaper, is now often part of a big media group. That big media group, I see that today Todd Bowley, who's the guy who runs Chelsea Football Club, has said that he's interested maybe in buying the Telegraph. Who is David Montgomery, who is a player in this field for many years, was somebody who came in and kind of caused some chaos at the Independent, at the Mirror Group. But in the end, these people are all about making a buck. They're not there because they want to spread democracy and they love the printed word. They're there to see how much money they can get out of these businesses. So even if these people end up as the owner, does that mean that for the people who are the writers and the editors at the Telegraph, that life becomes some sunny little garden full of roses? It's going to be tough whoever takes on that newspaper. They're going to want to make money, and they're going to want to follow a political line, whatever you do.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. That's Andrew Tuck, our Editor-in-Chief. And finally on the briefing today, we're going to have a flick through the Asian papers, and Monocle's Deputy Head of Radio, Tom Webb, joins me in the studio to do that now. Tom, thank you for being here. This terrible fire in South Korea it has finally been contained.
It's been an absolutely appalling atrocity in South Korea, the largest and worst wildfire in its history. And the way the media have described it is 70,000 soccer fields have just been completely destroyed, 28 deaths and 33,000 people displaced. However, in the last hour, it has been fully contained. And that's for two reasons. One is the weather. They've had overnight showers, they've had cool air, and also the fact that they've had the most amazing emergency services, 80 helicopters, people fighting all night, and it is now contained, and they promised they could do it by sunset Friday. They have done. And on top of this, to show the world how well and how effective that they've dealt with the fires, they've got an emergency relief payment, which is $200 per person. They've got plans to rebuild residential villages and build new villages for the displaced people. And they're going to build overnight drones and firefighters working overnight going forward. So they've got these new guidelines, and they're really showing the world we can cope with natural disasters.
I wonder if any of those helicopters are piloted by women, because certainly in Japan, if you're over 5'2", you can now do that, which you couldn't previously.
You couldn't, but you could if you're a man. And this is why I wanted to bring
you
this
could do it if you were a short man, under that height.
Absolutely.
That's extraordinary. I thought it was about not being able to reach the pedals, but it's just a sexist thing.
There's also the anatomy of women as well that gets in the way when you are a pilot. But I wanted to bring this story up because when I was flying internally in China, most of the pilots were female. And Japan has one of the worst rates of female pilots in the world. Only 1.9% of all pilots are female. And even in the Asia-Oceania region, it is as high as 6%. Now, Japan are trying to address this by getting 10% of all pilots female, and one reason they're doing this is removing this ludicrous height, which is, as you say, 5'1", as long as, and it says that the pilots can reach the aircraft control devices. And I mentioned female anatomy because there is this false conception that there is something in the way.
Right, their chest area just doesn't let them get close enough.
Exactly.
That's extraordinary. Is it true?
No, it's not.
Right. Well, let's talk about another great group of women, and this is the K-pop group, New Jeans. Now, they have been embroiled in this row for months. Tell us what's going on.
It's been going on since December. This is New Jeans, a huge five-piece girl group. We play them on Monocle Radio. Super Shy, one of our favourite tracks. Adore is their managing agency, and they are trying to get rid of them. They're trying to be an independent group. However, contracts say that they can't. They tried to break away and be NJZ, a play on New Jeans, and they were making this big announcement in Hong Kong this week. However, they cannot be independent, so they have announced that they are going to take a break. The newsline today is that there have been huge protests outside of Adore, and it's really divided the fan base, because half the fan base want them to continue negotiations with Adore and be a big successful group. The other half want their independence, their Free Britney moment. So it's causing an internal clash. And also today, Incheon Airport, Customs are getting rid of them as a sponsor. If you're wondering why New Jeans was a custom sponsor, is that Customs Office say that the girl group can raise awareness about customs and the country's main gateway. No more. And there's a very funny picture of the Chief of Customs standing very awkwardly between the five-piece girl group. He has now not commented on the decision to not renew the contract.
Now, one sort of common custom for most of us is when you purchase your cup of coffee, you take the sugar or the milk or whatever it is for free, and that's fine. It's what you do. But a woman has been arrested in Japan for doing just that. So there's more to the story, clearly.
There is more to the story because it is the first arrest of the kind. And it does raise the question, can you be arrested for stealing what is free items? This woman, 48-year-old from Japan, has stolen 160 items from coffee machines. This is sugar as well as the syrup, and more was found in her house. Sugar stacks, gum syrup and milk worth a total of $2. She has been arrested. The issue here is that she didn't purchase a coffee product, so she wasn't entitled to taking all the creamers. She is still currently arrested, and we don't know what charge is going to come her way.
Do we know what she wanted them for?
We do not know. Unfortunately, we are following this story very closely.
I'm sure we'll bring you live updates as we have them, listeners. Tom Webb, thank you very much. But as you leave, please leave that coffee behind. That's all for this edition of The Briefing, which was produced by Monica Lillis and Ryumi Takahashi. Our researcher was Francesca Gilks and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Georgina Godwin. Goodbye and thanks for listening.